On 8 November 1939, just 66 days after the outbreak of World War II, history came within minutes of taking a completely different path. Europe was already at war, but it was still a restrained war, a tense waiting period where armies faced each other across borders, and civilians hoped the conflict might somehow burn out quickly. The full horror of what was coming, the genocide, the ruined cities, the oceans filled with wreckage, and the deaths of tens of millions had not yet happened. On this cold autumn night in Munich, a single ordinary man came closer than anyone else would during the entire war to stopping it almost before it truly began. Germany, at that moment, was confident and unified on the surface. Adolf Hitler's authority was nearly absolute. His speeches were broadcast across the nation, his image filled newspapers, and his promises of restored national pride resonated deeply with a population still haunted by defeat in World War I. Poland had been invaded and defeated with terrifying speed. Britain and France had declared war, but little fighting had followed. Many Germans believed the conflict would be short, decisive, and victorious. Inside the Nazi leadership, however, there were already doubts, fears, and rivalries simmering beneath the surface, waiting for a moment of weakness. Every year, on 8 November, Hitler traveled to Munich to commemorate the anniversary of the Beer Hall Putsch of 1923, his failed attempt to seize power that had paradoxically launched his political career. The speech he gave on this night was not meant to plan military strategy or announce major decisions. It was symbolic, ritualistic, and personal. It was a reminder of how far he had come and a celebration of his perceived destiny. The venue was the Burgerbräu Keller, a large beer hall filled with thick stone pillars, wooden beams, and long tables crowded with party members, officials, and loyal supporters. What no one in that hall knew was that one of those pillars had been turned into a weapon. The man responsible was Georg Elser, a German carpenter from a small town, with no backing from foreign intelligence services, no support from political organizations, and no accomplices. Elser was not driven by ideology or ambition. He was driven by fear. Fear of another catastrophic war, and fear of what Hitler would do if allowed to continue unchecked. Elser had listened to Hitler's speeches closely, not as a fan, but as a warning. He believed with chilling clarity that Hitler's survival meant mass death on an unimaginable scale. Months before the speech, Elser began his plan alone. He studied Hitler's routine, noting that the dictator spoke at the same place on the same date every year. He memorized the beer hall's layout, observed security patterns, and calculated where Hitler would stand during his speech. Night after night, after the hall closed, Elser hid inside and quietly hollowed out the interior of a stone pillar using hand tools. He concealed the debris, repaired the surface, and ensured his work went unnoticed. It was painstaking, dangerous, and required extraordinary patience. Elser then built a bomb from scratch. He designed a complex timing mechanism using clockwork parts, testing it repeatedly to ensure precision. The explosion needed to be powerful enough to bring down the ceiling and kill everyone near the podium. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he knew the cost. Elser fully accepted that he would likely die if his plan succeeded. For him, that was a price worth paying if it meant preventing a war that would consume Europe. On evening of 8 November 1939, the Burgerbräu Keller filled as expected. Beer flowed, conversations echoed, and Nazi officials gathered beneath banners and flags. Adolf Hitler arrived later than scheduled, greeted by applause. Outside, however, the weather was deteriorating. An early winter storm was forming, threatening visibility and air travel. Because of this, Hitler made a decision that seemed trivial at the time, but would alter history. He chose to shorten his speech and leave earlier than planned, so he could return to Berlin by train rather than risk flying in poor weather. Hitler began his speech shortly after 8 p.m. He spoke confidently, praising past struggles and future victories. The audience listened attentively, unaware that death was counting down behind them. At 9:07 p.m., Adolf Hitler concluded his speech, left the podium, and exited the beer hall. Applause followed him as he disappeared into the night. 13 minutes later, at 9:20 p.m., the bomb detonated. The explosion tore through the pillar with devastating force. The ceiling collapsed, tables splintered, and smoke and dust filled the hall. The blast killed 8 people instantly and injured more than 60 others. Screams echoed through the wreckage as survivors clawed their way out. Firefighters and rescue crews rushed to the scene, pulling bodies from the debris. The space where Hitler had stood moments earlier was obliterated. Had Hitler remained for his usual speech length, he would have been standing directly above the bomb when it exploded. Along with him, much of the Nazi leadership present that night would have been killed. In a single instant, the head of the Nazi state would have been removed less than 3 months into World War II. The implications of that moment are staggering. In November 1939, the Nazi regime was powerful, but not yet hardened by years of total war. The Holocaust had not yet evolved into its industrial form. The Soviet Union had not yet been invaded. The United States was not part of the conflict. Hitler's death at that stage would have created a massive power vacuum. Rival factions within the Nazi leadership would have clashed. Senior military officers, many of whom already doubted Hitler's long-term strategy, might have sought negotiations. The war, though already underway, might have ended through internal collapse or diplomatic settlement. Instead, Hitler survived. When news of the explosion reached him, he reportedly interpreted his survival as proof of destiny, believing that fate itself protected him. This belief strengthened his sense of invincibility and reinforced his willingness to take extreme risks. Nazi propaganda quickly framed the assassination attempt as evidence of internal enemies and foreign plots, justifying harsher repression and tighter control over German society. Georg Elser was captured that same night while attempting to cross into Switzerland. He was stopped at the border, searched, and found carrying suspicious materials. When news of the bombing broke, authorities connected the dots. Elser was arrested, interrogated, and tortured. The Nazi leadership refused to believe he had acted alone. The idea that a single ordinary man, without backing or support, had nearly killed Hitler was unacceptable to them. For years, Elser was imprisoned in concentration camps, kept alive as a curiosity rather than executed immediately. His existence was barely acknowledged, his story buried beneath propaganda and denial. As the war dragged on, the scale of destruction he had tried to prevent became horrifyingly clear. Cities were reduced to rubble. Entire populations were exterminated. Europe became a graveyard. In April 1945, with Germany collapsing and Allied forces closing in, Adolf Hitler ordered Georg Elser's execution. Elser was shot just weeks before the war ended in Europe. He died knowing he had failed by minutes. Looking back, 8 November 1939 stands as one of the most haunting what-if moments in human history. A storm, a shortened speech, and a minor change in travel plans allowed the deadliest conflict ever fought to continue. World War II did not end that night by accident, but it came terrifyingly close. In those 13 minutes between departure and explosion, the fate of millions was sealed, and history moved forward into its darkest chapter.